Our guest today is Travis Gearhart, the Libertarian candidate for Indiana House District 4. District 4 covers much of northwestern Indiana, including communities throughout Porter County, where voters are weighing a three-way race between Republican incumbent Ed Soliday and Democratic nominee Ryan Kominakis, and Libertarian challenger Travis Gearhart. As a Libertarian candidate, Travis is offering voters a different perspective on the role of government, individual liberty, taxation, regulation, and personal freedom. Today, we'll discuss the issues affecting District 4, what separates his vision from those of his opponents, and why he believes libertarian principles offer the best path forward for Northwest Indiana. Travis, welcome to Hold Them Accountable.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Derek.
Let's start here. District 4 has seen continued growth while trying to preserve its identity. What do you believe is the biggest issue facing residents today?
That's easy. NIPSCO. In fact, I wore one of my favorite campaign shirts. So early on in the campaign, I created a 6-point pledge saying these are going to be my main 6 topics. This is what I'm going to really focus on. And then I ended up needing to add a 7th, and that was a full audit of NiSource. One of the biggest issues around this area is the fact that a culmination of events have caused all of our NIPSCO bills to be going through the roof. And a lot of it does center around Ed Soliday, because Ed Soliday sits on a lot of the boards that appoints the people that make those decisions. So he's directly involved in it. And I guess being directly involved in it, you would think that he'd have more of a sympathetic eye to it. That hasn't really been the case. He's been very kind of aloof when it comes to questions being asked. He's been very kind of, oh, well, of course your bills went up. It's wintertime. Or of course your bills went up. It's summertime. You turned your AC up, kind of very, kind of what we would typically see out of a Republican candidate when somebody's struggling, right? It's a very pull yourself up by the bootstraps. So quit your complaining. You don't know what hot is. Back in my day, we had real heat back in my day. So it's very much, that's the type of reaction that's given. And it's one of the reasons, even when I was involved in the Republican Party, I wasn't a huge Ed Soliday fan, all things being honest. And that's why I decided to run, was because he actually made a lot of national headlines because I don't know if you saw this, but his back and forth with the mayor of Portage. So the mayor of Portage is a very well liked mayor, and he had posted on his Facebook a text message that he had gotten from Ed Soliday that said, because he had dared to disagree with him and some of the other Republicans on the rate increases that were proposed and approved for NIPSCO. And he said something about it. I forget what he had said. Something arbitrary, something that any mayor that's concerned about his citizens would, like, hey, we need to maybe revisit this. We need to look at it. And Ed Soliday sent him a personal text message saying, I'll see it to it that the city of Portage never sees another dime of funding ever again. And not, now, mind you, it's not even just, you shouldn't do it. It shouldn't matter whether it's Republican or Democrat or Libertarian or progressive. That shouldn't matter, right? But the fact that it's one Republican versus another Republican is even more comical. And so that's one of the main issues that I've really, thrown my hat into the ring on. And again, I put it on a shirt, and I'm going to be wearing this shirt walking in 4th of July parades in 2 days. So I'm not shying away from it. In fact, it's on my business card, and I was actually at a NIPSCO sponsored golf outing the other day, and I was handing that business card out with Audit NiSource on the back of it. So it's kind of funny. And again, it's nothing against, I have a lot of friends that work in the utilities. I have a lot of people that I've known. The fact that they had the lockout was garbage. I'm glad that they were able to come to an agreement, but the lockout, there's another lockout going on currently still, BP Whiting. That's garbage. So that's really what got me involved in the race. That's what made me decide to get, was seeing that. And I had gotten out of politics for a little while. I used to sit on the Hebron Town Council. I was the youngest elected Republican in a Democrat town. I was a union steelworker for 2003 for most of my time living in Hebron. I grew up in Hebron. vacated my town council seat because my work transferred me to Wisconsin, and so I had to leave. When I came back a few years later, I actually ran for Porter County Council, still as a Republican. And I came through in the primary, and I came just short in the general election. It was pick 3, and I was 4th. So out of it. So, a little bit tight and short, but that was the race that happened while I was getting divorced. And it was funny because a lot of people that had gotten involved in the past, they didn't want to, as soon as things got a little messy in politics, everybody wants to run for the hills, right? So a lot of people that made a lot of promises that wanted to support me during that race, all of a sudden disappeared. So kind of fast forward, I spent about 8 years, 9 years almost, kind of in the wilderness. I'd always been a more libertarian leaning, like I wasn't a huge rah-rah Ron Paul fan in my early years. I still kind of bought into the foreign policy hawk thing, like, well, we got to fight them over there, so we're not fighting them over here, kind of that crap. It took me a lot longer than it should have for me to kind of figure that out, but I'm here. So eventually I figured out that was garbage. So yeah, that's why I joined the Big L Libertarian Party after kind of being politically homeless for a while. And I absolutely credit the Porter County Libertarian Party, and Mike, the head person there. I was contacting him and talking to him, Mike Telesky, and he kind of talked me into joining because I was just going to run as an independent. And I was looking at how many signatures I need. And then again, I've always been libertarian, small L. And so talking to him, he's like, well, what are you thinking about running on? And I kind of gave him all my points. And he's like, you can do what you want. He goes, but if you run as a libertarian, we have ballot access. And I was like, sold. So that was, but it was more than that. That's what got me in the door. Once I got in the door and started really digging into the platform and looking at it, I was like, oh no, this was a good move. So very quickly, I've gotten really embraced by the Big L Libertarian Party. They don't hold the fact I'm a former Republican against me. And yeah, so to kind of, I just gave you a way longer answer than I had intended, but that's politics, that's show business, baby. So yeah, basically NIPSCO is what really got me involved in it. And I live in this area, I've grew up in this whole area, and yeah, there's a lot of good things about Northwest Indiana, without a doubt, but at a certain point in time, and that's why one of my number one on my list of 6 was term limits. Soliday's been in there forever. Anything that you can say, and I sure I could go over his votes and his bills line by line, and there's things I like and there's things I don't like, just like every other politician under the sun. But the reality is that the Republican Party, as it stands today, is not going in the right direction. And I think that's kind of the understatement of the year. I mean, everything. When it comes to the big parties, when it comes to the R's and the D's, the leadership comes from the top, and it comes from the president, and it comes from the governor, right? So even if you are a Republican and you are sympathetic to unionization, or you are, if you are number 2 on my list is legalize cannabis, it makes perfect sense to me. If they've basically made it well known that if you have a libertarian bone in your body, just look at the Thomas Massey race. You're not welcomed in the Republican Party. They still want you to show up and vote, but you're not going to actually have a say. We're not going to care about what you are, And Trump ran on basically a libertarian platform in a lot of senses. No new foreign wars, Doge, so that we can try to clean up government spending. What else was there? He talked about cannabis. He descheduled it, but that actually creates more problems because now you have this descheduling. And from what I've understood, and again, I'm no cannabis expert, but the descheduling actually is worse for the people that already have the cannabis set up. So now you're basically saying, well, the government can kind of be involved, but not really, but it's still kind of illegal. So it's just, I saw a good meme, and not to stray too far off the subject, but somebody had, and this was actually a Biden meme, and it was Joe Biden saying, I don't think we should legalize marijuana, but I definitely think that everybody that's in jail should be not be in jail for it. And somebody had commented like, dude, your generation has to pick a lane. You guys are in the left lane going 40 miles an hour, stopping up traffic. So listen, it's cannabis is natural. We've already done all the tests. We know that it doesn't do anything. And in the state of Indiana, especially Northwest Indiana, we're seeing trillions of dollars in tax revenue coming from the North and Michigan, coming from Illinois, not coming to us, of course, going to their own, states. So in the meantime, you've got perceived budget shortfalls. You've got Ed Soliday, who was a big fan of increasing toll roads, adding toll roads. In fact, the state of Indiana, as you well know, passed a law that said they can make any road a toll road. That's, I think it's number 3 on my list. No, number 3 is end right to work. Number 4 on my list is no new toll roads. So that's another thing that got me involved is no new toll roads. Listen, Mitch Daniels screwed up, and I was a fan of it at the time because I didn't know any better. I was a rah-rah Republican and I didn't really look it over. But that 99-year lease with the toll road, that kind of killed us. We got a chunk of money that was given to us. Well, you and I both know that chunk of money is not really shown the returns. I mean, just look at inflation. How much has our monetary policy screwed us all with inflation? Well, that amount of money, how much more money are they getting in actual tolls every day? And the roads aren't getting fixed at nearly the level they need to. So that's part of what they wanted to do with the new toll roads. You could solve that shortfall real quick by selling something that's a natural grown product that you can sit there and say that you're concerned about people. Well, the strains of marijuana are dangerous. It could cause psychosis. It could cause this. They could be mixing it with other drugs. Well, all the more reason to go ahead and put it and sell it from a dispensary where you know that it's coming from a place that has to follow FDA regulations, So, and then for us here in Northwest Indiana, it has always been crap that we have to do emission testing up here. So emission testing. So the data shows that less than 2% of tested vehicles actually fail emissions in Northwest Indiana, almost all due to minor sensor issues, not pollution. Now, the problem is that our air quality here is actually worse than almost everywhere in the world. And that has to do people think immediately they think of the refineries, they think of the steel mills. That's a factor for sure, but actually it has more to do with the fact that this is the crossroads of America. This is where 8094 meets 80 meets I-65, and we have a lot of traffic that comes through here, and we got a lot of the Chicago pollution also kind of comes this way. So we're just a busy area. But that's, so test and also testing burdens low income drivers at such a higher rate. So, and it adds no measurable environmental benefit. So it's kind of one of those, if it's a bad law, it's a bad law. They've kind of talked about it. They've kind of kicked around taking care of it. The rest of the state doesn't have it. So for whatever reason, we're the redheaded stepchildren. And I don't see our current state rep really stepping up trying to do anything about that. And then the last of my, obviously I already mentioned end right to work. That's an easy one. That's right to work hasn't done what, and again, I always look back and I take ownership of being for it in 2012 and I was actually in a union, and I was the one union person that was very like, this won't be that big of a deal. It's, I bought it hook, line, and sinker, as a 20-something-year-old, and as a 40-year-old, I look back on it and I'm like, all it did was take away your bargaining chip. All it did was really make it, and it didn't even really bring any business. I mean, if you look at the surrounding growth charts, Indiana has not grown exponentially more than Illinois and Ohio, which are not right to work states. And Michigan's a little bit of a different animal because they don't, that wasn't really an issue. But so regardless, we don't, it's as a libertarian, if it's a bad law, it's a bad law. Take it off the books. You don't even have to be pro-union, and I know a lot of libertarians aren't. I personally am pro-union, and I know you would think as a progressive that would be more of a progressive value. I actually see it as more of a libertarian value because we look at businesses and we look at, all right, well, there's different aspects to it. You got to buy the raw materials, you got to buy the transportation, you have the overhead, you have this and that. I absolutely think that one of the most overlooked staples of any business is the manpower. And right now, I think we're screwing up, not to make this a big picture thing, but for the forest for the trees type deal, is that we're screwing up with AI because you're taking away a lot of the human touch. There's so many movies that tell us this. Just right off the bat, comes to mind is iRobot. He hates robots. Why? Because he had a better statistical chance of surviving, and so the robot saved his life instead of his daughter's. That's the type of shit that we're going to look back at and say, man, that human touch. I don't care if it's a 1% chance. I know it's a 99% chance for me. You take my kids out of that car immediately. That's not even a question, right? And any father, any person would have that exact same sympathy. So yeah, I think that if it's bad legislation, if it's bad law, and we've had 2012, what's that, 14 years? We've had 14 years, almost 15 years. I think we should revisit things like the right to work law and say, hey, what's the factor? Oh, well, we've had 2 lockouts in Northwest Indiana. Maybe if you're the state rep and a majority of your people work for a union in this area, maybe you should take collective bargaining and take a second look at whether or not you support it. And then the last one for me is to end the income tax. I am, again, libertarian here. Taxation is theft. I think that you should lower it as much as possible. And I know that is, that on a progressive page, it's like, I think that when it comes to the income tax, I think that you can supplement that with a combination of things. I think a value added tax. I think the income tax unnecessarily burdens, especially the way that it's written now, unnecessarily burdens you. And there's other better ways to fund the government. I am a big fan of switching it over to a VAT tax, and then you don't have to worry about taxing the rich, because guess what? The rich, they buy stuff actually exponentially more than you and I do. So if you get away from the income tax and you take away all of the windfalls that the rich have, they have ways to hide their money. That that, I know that. I'm no fan of the rich. I'm no Elon Musk flag waver. But a lot of people are like, oh, well, we have a trillionaire. Well, a couple things. One, it's all in stocks and all that crap. But 2, you wouldn't have as many trillionaires or billionaires even if you stopped bailing out corporations, if you allowed actual free market to work, if you actually say, all right, we have winners and we have losers in the free market. Oh, you guys made some bad investments. Okay, well, they're selling off the business for pennies on the dollars. Somebody else gets a chance to do it. You don't, just because you have a bunch of friends in government doesn't mean that you should just be able to gamble. And what are you gambling with? Number 2, you're gambling with taxpayer dollars, because a lot of those businesses get money on the front end. A lot of those businesses are given either loans, or they're given, look at, and I think it's actually pushed us back in green energy is when you have the green energy where they say, all right, well, you have all of these, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm having a elder moment. All of these, when the government grants. So you have all these grants to push green energy, right? Green energy, and this is me talking to a lot of my buddies at NIPSCO, is a lot of it isn't affordable, right? Right now, it's not affordable. Wind power in particular, solar much more so. And solar, they're doing a lot more, but everybody was hanging it on wind power back in the early 2000s and 2010s in the Obama era. And there was a lot of data out there at the time that said, no, wind turbines, there's a lot of things not to like about it. So you have to allow the market to dictate what type of green energy, and you have to give it the chance. And so now when you're throwing government money at something, you're artificially propping it up, and you're there. In the meantime, you could have had 100 corporations that were looking at wind farms and saying, how can we we're not making money at this. How can we fix this to make money? And unfortunately, the government stepped in and said, you don't have to. We're going to taxpayer subsidize this. Well, all you're doing is hurting it. If we could make it so we have never have to burn coal ever again and save the environment. Listen, I am a huge environmental guy. I just got engaged at a national park. I don't want to see national parks go away. I don't want to see, one of the things I dislike about Valparaiso, what they're doing right now is that everything's getting paved. They're building up, and it happens. And so I understand it, but I like the country. I don't want to, be like a Counting Crows song, they pave paradise and put up a parking lot, right? I like where I live. I live out here outside of Valpo, between Valpo and Couts in Malden. It's literally a grain silo and a bar. Perfect. This is my heaven on earth. So, all right, but I'll quit yapping and I'll let you go to the next question.
To go down the line of taxes, property taxes continue to be one of the top concerns I hear from Hoosiers every day. What reforms would you support at the State House for property tax?
Oh, man, property tax. I know that they're talking about eliminating property taxes, and I'm not against that. I know. So I know that when you look at states that do, obviously one of my planks is to do away with income tax. Now I know traditionally when you look at states that do away with income tax, it's usually a one or the other. You have the income tax and you have low property taxes, or you have high property taxes and you have no income tax. If you're forcing me to choose between the two, I will say do away with the income tax, because again, that to me is the most fairest way to do it. Listen, and this isn't just my own personal thing. I rent. I don't. My property taxes go towards my landlord. So if you cut my property taxes, my landlord's not going to cut my rent, and not that he should. I'm not suggesting that he shouldn't. Like, and I have a good landlord, and he doesn't rake me over the coals. He makes a living. In fact, he just came over real sheepishly and raised my rent like $100, and I was like, it's cool, man. He did not want to do it. He was like, I'm so sorry. He's actually a immigrant from Poland, and really nice guy, great family. And we're renting right now because when I moved over to the area, I travel so much for work. As far as being jerked around, I grew up in Hebron. I moved to Griffith shortly when I graduated. I went from Griffith back to Hebron, lived there for a while, got married, bought a house out there, got transferred to Wisconsin, lived in Belgium, Wisconsin for 4 years, left there, came to Chesterton, Indiana, moved from Chesterton, moved in with my girlfriend in the Four Seasons for a couple of years. That was a mistake. She was crazy. Lived there for a couple of years and then moved back to home for a minute while I was kind of getting my bearings, and then came here, and I've been here for 3 years in Valparaiso. But this has been, I grew up in Valpo. Hebron's in Porter County. I grew up in this area, right? So this is where my roots have been this entire time. But who knows when, being in sales, who knows when something's going to come up and they say, hey, we need you to be in California. You just don't know. So I'm renting right now. Also, as high as the housing market is, I'm kind of waiting for the crash to buy. I'll be honest with you. So, and so I am not buying right now. And the main reason I'm not buying right now is what I just said. But so when it comes to property taxes, though, that's if you're gun to my head, you're making me choose income or property, I choose income tax to do away with. I know that's not the way it works. So if I were elected tomorrow and the Republicans that's the other nice part about being a third party, right? I don't have to caucus with either. So I've thought about this at length. I can caucus with Democrats whenever I want. I can caucus with Republicans whenever I want. So if they put a bill forward to eliminate property taxes, yes, I would vote for it. I would maybe offer an amendment or offer some ideas that we maybe lower property taxes to a bare bones and then eliminate income taxes or find something. I'm not so hard-headed that I can't work between the margins. Like that's the thing about it is when a lot of people will be like, it's so unrealistic for a libertarian to walk in and say government should only handle about 3 things and government shouldn't handle anything else. And I say, no, I'm a realist. I'm a libertarian. That's what I think is ideal. But you don't start, and this is where Republicans and Democrats screw up, is they start with this much. They start going, well, maybe I'll propose. Listen, I've been in a union. You don't sit down at the bargaining table and start with a 1% raise. No, you shoot for the stars and land on the moon. So yeah, I'm going to come in and I'm going to say my big picture idea is that we limit government to taking care of the roads, offering some sort of social safety net. I think that's absolutely something that you have to have. I think that's what you need to do. I'd have to sit down and go over and think about it. But, I think the government should be much, as bare bones as possible. I know that that's not where the majority of people are at in the country at this point. I think I think, and we kind of mentioned this earlier a little bit, I think when we were talking off air, I think that regardless of whether you believe you should have more limited government, there's not going to be a choice pretty soon, because monetarily something's going to go. And unfortunately for the two of us, the biggest one of that's probably going to be Social Security.
We haven't really touched on healthcare yet. It continues to rise in Indiana. From your perspective, what reforms would improve affordability and access to healthcare?
Man, see, and that's one thing that I do need to know more about. That's that if I do have one spot that I want to, I actually did have Jody Allen from the Coalition of Advanced Practice Registered Nurses and on our show, and she was talking about so there was some legislative endeavors trying to get let me find the right, but basically she was trying to push it for allowing more within the state of Indiana. If I want to make sure I get this right, in the state of Indiana, there have been different measures of registered nurses trying to allow some of what they have to do when they write prescriptions is there's a whole bunch of rigmarole that you have to go through, and doctors have to get their lump of basically pound of flesh. And that's not to solve the whole thing, but I think a lot of things like that need to happen. I think a lot of things can happen along that lines. I know that there's kind of a Medicare for everyone. I know that there's a big push of that within more of the progressives. I'm hesitant to, until you really fix some of the issues, you're spending $2 for everyone. You have so much bureaucracy with it. And I don't know there's a quick fix to it. I've seen some stuff talking about, some free market alternatives where instead of having health insurance, it's kind of like the crowd-funded insurance options. That is one spot that I'm a little weak in. I've got a few different things that I've read and looked at. I don't think I'd be open to the idea of expanding Medicare. I'm open to any ideas, I guess, is what my point is. I think that there's a lot of different little things. I don't think that there's a silver bullet. I think a lot of these issues we can come up with, hey, here is really where the main issue is. I think there's a lot of issues with healthcare. I think you have to deal with the fact that there's a lot of healthcare agencies that don't want to go into underserved areas where they're needed the most. I think, unfortunately, where you do need more funding, you don't have it. I think that is one area that you could increase and should increase funding by also lowering it in other areas. So, I think that increased funding is necessary for more of those programs. But again, I guess that's kind of my answers. I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think I'm open to several different ideas. I have on my website, I have the site or the link to the advanced to the Coalition of Advanced Practice Registered Nurses, and they have a lot of different legislation that they've been trying to push, somewhat successfully, somewhat unsuccessfully. The biggest problem is from having her on the show, that she had kind of said was that there's a lot more doctors in the House. Or which one was it? One of them. It passed either in the Senate or the House. I don't remember. It was passed in the state Senate. I'm sorry. Okay. But I would, if day one, I would be a co-sponsor, try to get it passed again in the House. And I think things like that. I'm open to sitting down with the people that actually know where the problems are. And I guess that's not something you hear from a politician a lot, to say I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to sit down and talk about it. You know what I mean? And I guess you could, Soliday or Ryan could take that clip and run it and say, look, he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. And I'd say, well, you guys aren't doctors either. So I would like to sit down with them and come up with some good ideas. Again, I naturally shy away from the kind of Medicare for all. But that's just a difference in vision. And I think, I think that, but I'm not opposed to sitting down and hearing it. So
another issue that we haven't touched on is education funding. It continues to be hotly debated around traditional public schools, charter schools, and vouchers. Where do you sit in that whole debate?
This one I actually know quite a bit about. My mom just retired a couple of years ago. She was a teacher, so I've heard it all. So, yes, I am okay with the. And I know this one's going to be a jolt. Even she was, and she was very much like involved in the teachers union. I'm okay with the dissolving of the Department of Education on a national level. Here's why. I want that funding to go back to the states and let the states deal with. Each state has their own problems with education, and I think that money, when you start with that money at the top and it trickles down, just like we were talking about, bureaucracy eats up. You're spending $2 for every one. So I think rather than having that money go towards the Department of Education, it stays in the states and the states handle it as they see fit. You have more money almost immediately. And if you look at what the Department of Education does on a national level, ever since it's been created, literally every year, the numbers have gone down. Literally. And so, and that's not to say that, I'm not trying to go with causation versus actualization. I'm just saying that's what the stats are. So I don't have any problem with trying that. The voucher system, I think it needs reformed. I think the biggest problem with the voucher system, I think as a father, I think that it makes sense for me to take my tax dollars, and if I really don't like my particular public school, I should be able to go to a different school and say, hey, I'm applying my voucher to this. This is my chunk of the piece of the pie. And now I usually then would, normally then I would have to pay more of it out of my own pocket. So I'm okay with that. The problem is that the way that you look at the private schools, they aren't on the same standards. And I'm sure you know this already. Some of these private schools, the standards are asinine, right? If you're a teacher in a public school and you don't meet the requirements, you don't get your pay raise. Private schools aren't on that same thing. So if the private schools are going to get public funds, then yes, they need to be on the exact same damn standards. If you're getting public money, you are going to be on the standards set. I don't have a problem. I guess I would defer to I think that would be a good discussion with the teachers unions, because I know that there's a lot of teachers that I've talked to that are okay with having the standards because they're like, hey, yeah, all right, well, we need some sort of metric. Now, the problem is, listen, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So I think you need to revisit those standards. I think that is something that should be a bipartisan, not even bipartisan. That's not the word I meant to say. I'm sorry. Teachers, both the state education board and the teachers unions should sit down and hammer it out. Pick a metric every 2 years, every 3 years, every 4 years. I think that's something that should happen. I think that makes sense. I think that you can agree on a standard. I think you could sit down. Most people in unions that I've worked with and worked in don't have a problem having a metric or some sort of set of standards. Everybody has it. The problem is when the standards aren't being equally applied. And the problem is when the standards are uneven realistic, right? Like up here in Northwest Indiana, you have different schools, and this makes sense. Different schools around here have different disabilities, right? So when we moved to Morgan Township, I was sitting at the choir thing, and I'm like, I turned to my girlfriend, now fiance, and I'm like, is it me or there are a lot of blind kids? Like, there's like 3 blind kids here. Like, is there something in the water? Like, should we not be drinking the well water? Because why are there so many damn blind kids? And I found out real quick that it's because in Northwest Indiana, you have all the blind kids, pretty much they get bused to Morgan Township. And because they have a setup for the blind, all of the hearing impaired, if I remember correctly, go to Chesterton. Well, in Hebron, it's the physical. I don't know what the technical. I think it's still a retardation. Don't crucify me if I'm not saying the right verbiage.
So you're talking about Down syndrome,
Down syndrome, yeah, stuff like that. So so let's use that as an example. Now, I don't want to, not saying that there's anything wrong with having a disability. Obviously, my fiance works for Opportunity Enterprises. She works with disabled people every day. We go to a lot of events. We are actually very active in that community. I'm very, very pro disabled funding as well. But now you have a bunch of people that are testing, and listen, there's a little bit of the difference in a disability of somebody that's blind versus Down syndrome, right? You're gonna have different standards, different, there's a lot of stuff that has to work out along that, and then you have private schools. Public schools have to bring in everybody, right? Private schools can say, these are your test scores from the school you just came from. Nah, sorry, we're not admitting anybody. So now you have those same standards, or even if you had those same standards, well, now that private school is able to go right around it. So I think that stuff has to be hammered out. I like the idea. And especially in, I live right down the road from Gary, Indiana. Spoiler alert, if you're not from the Gary, Indiana area, it's not the nicest place to go and send your kids to school. There's a lot of gang violence. There's a lot of drugs. Not that that's not in every school, yada, yada. But it's just a physical fact, right? So if you're a mom and you don't want, and you're willing to, and she works extra hours at the Piggly Wiggly so that she can make sure that she sends her baby to Valparaiso so that they can have a good education, then yeah, I think that I'm down for having a program like that gives you more control of your money. I'll always be down for that. But that being said, it was also written and put into place with a lot of caveats that either need to be reformed or replaced.
What are your thoughts when people say the whole school voucher program? Not talking about school choice. School choice, all for that. But the school voucher program is modern day segregation. Because private schools don't have to accept everybody.
No, they don't. I don't know. That's a tough one, because private schools don't have to accept everybody, but you've always had private schools. I mean, I guess then what's the equation? You do away with private schools? Is that the thought process?
Here's the big question is because now everybody can get vouchers. There's no income restrictions on it anymore.
Well, you still have a little bit because your voucher is only good for X amount of dollars, right? So me versus let's say my neighbor, let's say I live next to a guy in a mansion, right? And he was like a billionaire, right? From my understanding, and I might be wrong, but my understanding is my voucher is still the same amount as his voucher per kid. Is my understanding. I could be wrong on that, and then there might be some viewers screaming at this, going, "No, you're an idiot," and maybe I'm an idiot. Then correct us.
And we welcome the comments.
And that's why we do this, is not just to promote and give my ideas, but to learn as well. Mm-hmm. So, and like I get what you're saying. See what my mom's complaint always was that you get the private schools that bring in all of the athletes. So that was less, her complaints were less from a racial standpoint because like the example I just gave, Valparaiso's a public school. So if you move from, let's say, East Chicago, Gary, Indiana to Valparaiso, it's a hike and you're putting in the time and effort to get your kid to a nice school. And the reality is that, as well, there's a lot more white kids in Valpo, a lot more black kids in Gary. It just, we can go over the socioeconomics and white flight and steel mills and all that, but that's just the reality of where we live right now, right? And I think, and I know that there are still issues every now and again. I know Chesterton just had one where there was a black boy that kind of had some issues and that, but with social media and whatnots, I mean, the people, they were pretty well crucified pretty quick. It wasn't able to be pushed under the rug, and that's where I think it's a good thing. And there are less instances. You're never going to completely do away, as long as you have the ability to be a free thinker. You're never going to to do away with any person. You're never going to do away with evil, and that's what racism is. Racism is evil. You can pass all the laws you want. That's not going to happen. Now, with that being said, obviously you shouldn't, have it be in your school that you're able to call in the N-word. Like I'm not saying that should be that should be allowed. But I'm just saying that as far as that being like a civil rights issue, I mean, the areas up, especially up around here, has been getting a lot more diverse. I guess is what my point is. So with the private schools, I think you still see a lot because you have a lot of athletes, and a lot of those athletes are Black kids or Mexican or Hispanic or whatever. I don't know. Pick a color. I don't care. I'm pretty easygoing with all that stuff. I know not everybody is, and I that's I don't think that I don't know. I don't know how you would I guess gauge that. You know what I mean? I know from an athlete, again, my mom's biggest issue was the fact that you would have these athletes come in and they would go to private schools, and because that private school was able to skirt around some of the legal issues, then they, oh, look, Andrean's going to state again. Good for you, So, yeah,
we have
I
the
don't
same
know.
issue down here, Cathedral.
Yeah.
That was always Cathedral.
Yeah. So they can always get they get the best ones, and, I don't know. I don't know what, I don't know if there's a good answer to that. I mean, private schools are always going to be a little inclusionary. You're always going to have to still, I mean, and so you're still going to have kind of an income ratio deal, with that, because you're still going to have, you're still going to be able to spend extra money on top of the thing. So now the next question is then do the private schools just raise their rates that much to be? And I'm sure that happens. I without even doing the research on it, I'm sure that private schools have just raised their rates to help keep out the undesirables. There's not a doubt in my mind. And I guess then from there you have to look at I guess from there you'd have to look at are private schools teachers even union? No? Okay. I wasn't sure if the teachers unions were still in there or not. So yeah, I mean, that might be something to look at then is, if the vouchers, maybe that would be something to look at is vouchers. You'd have a smaller voucher amount if you went to a private school. I'm sure there's course correction ways that you could address that. But I guess for me too, it would have to be looking at the statistics. I don't really know, to be honest. I guess, if you put a statistic in front of me and it's an obvious, like, hey, here's a problem that could and should be addressed. I start with the purity test. Like, is this something the government should be involved in? Is this something that I could either that should be done, or could be just a resolution like, hey, will it be here today that, state rep, I'm putting a resolution forward that we highly recommend that the private schools do more to do, there's things that you can do along those lines as well to kind of, a shot across the bow, I guess, so to speak. And not enough of that happens. I do think that it's not too many people are too afraid to raise their voice, right? They're too afraid to say, hey, we're seeing the statistic, guys. This isn't looking great. How about we try to fix this? Signed, your state rep, and go from there,
Travis, it's come time for hold 'em or fold 'em. Everybody's favorite yes/no round, where it really puts you in the hot seat. I'll read 6 statements. If you agree, you hold them. If you disagree, you fold them. Feel free to use a word or two to briefly explain your answer. Healthcare should be considered a human right, and every Hoosier should have access to affordable healthcare.
Yes.
Corporate PAC money has too much influence in politics, and candidates should refuse donations from corporate PACs.
Yes.
Indiana should fully fund public schools before expanding private school voucher programs.
Yes.
Workers should have the right to organize and collectively bargain without interference.
Yes.
Marijuana should be legalized, regulated, and taxed for adult recreational use.
Unequivocally, yes.
Elected officials should be willing to vote against their own party if it's in the best interests of their constituents.
Yes.
Travis, thank you for taking the time to join us today. Running for public office is never an easy decision, and regardless of party affiliation, I appreciate every candidate who's willing to step forward and answer questions and engage directly with voters. Northwest Indiana has no shortage of important issues to tackle, and conversations like this help voters better understand the choices they'll have on Election Day. I appreciate you sharing your perspective and giving our audience the opportunity to hear from you directly. And to everyone watching and listening, Whether you're here in Indiana, across the country, or joining us from abroad, remember that democracy works best when voters stay informed and participate. So stay informed, ask questions, and as always, hold them accountable.